Hey guys, tonight we're taking a deep, disturbing dive into a classic fairy tale, peeling back the layers of enchantment to reveal the gritty, sometimes gruesome truth behind Cinderella's glass slipper. You might think you know this story, all glittering gowns and pumpkin carriages. But trust me, the historical realities of life for someone like Cinderella were far from magical. In fact, if you were in her shoes, or, well, her cinders, you'd probably be too busy trying to avoid frostbite and starvation to even dream of a ball. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are there, in a drafty, perpetually cold kitchen, your hands raw and red from endless scrubbing, the scent of stale ash, greasy cooking fat, and unwashed wool clings to you like a second skin, every morning, before the first hint of dawn paints the sky. You are roused from your fitful sleep on a thin, straw pallet by the harsh clang of a bell, or often by the sharp rap of a broom handle against the wall. The cold, damp air seeps into your bones, a constant companion that even the meagre fire in the hearth can't quite banish. Your name, once something cherished and lyrical, now feels forgotten, replaced by the cruel moniker they've given you, Cinderella, the girl who sleeps by the cinders. Your stepmother, a woman whose face is as sharp and unforgiving as her tongue, surveys your every movement with a critical eye. Her two daughters, your stepsisters, are no better. They are like twin statues of discontent, their faces perpetually twisted into sneers, their voices shrill and demanding, while you mend their torn stockings, clean their muddied shoes, and prepare their elaborate breakfasts. They lounge by the fire, complaining about the chill, about the quality of the bread, about anything and everything. Their indolence is matched only by their cruelty. Your days are a relentless cycle of thankless labour. You fetch water from the well, the heavy wooden bucket chafing your shoulders. You chop wood, the axe handle too thick for your small hands. Splinters a constant menace. You sweep the floors, scrub the pots until they gleam, polish the silver until your reflection stares back, a ghost of your former self. Your fingers are perpetually pricked by needles from endless mending. Your back aches from constant bending, and your skin is perpetually grimy, no matter how much you scrub. In the historical context of early modern Europe, domestic servitude was a common fate for orphaned or impoverished young women, often involving extremely demanding labour, poor living conditions, and little to no pay. This was not a life of leisure, but one of brutal, unceasing toil. The clothes you wear are hand-me-downs, rags of drab linen and coarse wool, perpetually patched and worn thin in places. They offer little protection against the biting cold of winter or the relentless heat of summer. Your hair, constantly escaping its meagre braid, is perpetually dusted with ash and flour. You often catch glimpses of yourself in polished surfaces, a reflection gaunt with exhaustion, eyes shadowed with perpetual weariness. But even then, you see a flicker of something else, a stubborn spark of resilience that refuses to be extinguished. Food is a constant preoccupation, not for your stepfamily, who feast on roasted meats, rich gravies, and sweet pastries. But for you, your portions are meagre, often just the scraps left over from their plates. Cold and unappetizing, you eat quickly, discreetly, often standing by the hearth, trying to snatch a moment of warmth as you swallow the dry crumbs. Your stomach often growls in protest, a constant, hollow ache that no amount of meagre sustenance seems to appease. You dream of rich, warm bread, of thick, savoury stews, of anything that would truly fill you. The mental torment is often worse than the physical. The constant barrage of insults, the casual cruelty, the deliberate exclusion from any semblance of comfort or affection. Cinderella, you clumsy oaf, you've spilled the water again. Your stepmother would shriek, look at her. Sister, she actually thinks she can be clean. Your stepsisters would snicker, pointing at your smudged face. You learn to make yourself small, invisible, to avoid their wrath. You learn to bite your tongue, to swallow the bitter retorts that rise in your throat. This constant emotional abuse, this psychological warfare, chipped away at your spirit, leaving you hollowed out, but never quite broken. Your only solace is the brief moments of solitude, stolen in the dead of night. After the household has finally fallen silent, you would sit by the dying embers of the fire, the only source of warmth, and allow yourself to dream, not of grand adventures or mythical creatures, but of simple things: a warm bed, a full meal, a kind word sometimes. You would imagine your long-lost parents, their faces hazy, their voices a distant whisper. You remembered your mother's gentle touch, her soft lullabies, and the memory was a fragile comfort in the overwhelming loneliness. One particularly harsh winter, the cold seemed to seep into every corner of the house. The firewood was scarce, and your stepmother, in her usual parsimony, rationed it cruelly. You shivered constantly, your fingers and toes numb with cold. You remember rubbing your hands together vigorously, trying to coax some warmth into them, while your stepsisters complained loudly about the lack of warmth. Despite being wrapped in furs and thick woolen cloaks, you wished for a simpler life, even a harder one, if it meant freedom from this endless and soul-crushing abuse. The stark class divisions of the era meant that while the wealthy could indulge in luxuries, the poor, even those in domestic service, often faced severe hardship, cold and hunger, making Cinderella's plight historically plausible. It wasn't just a story of a mean stepmother, it was a reflection of societal inequality. You also developed an almost uncanny ability to discern the moods of your stepfamily. You could tell, by the way your stepmother's jaw clenched, or the way one of your stepsisters drummed her fingers impatiently, whether a storm was brewing. This hypervigilance, born of constant fear, allowed you to anticipate their demands, to move with greater speed, to avoid some of their more capricious cruelties. It was a skill for survival, a constant mental exercise in predicting human behaviour. One day, while polishing your stepmother's ornate silver tea set, you accidentally dropped a spoon. It clattered loudly against the stone floor, echoing in the otherwise silent room. Your heart leaped into your throat. You instinctively braced yourself for the inevitable explosion of rage, but instead, a low, guttural growl came from beneath the table. You looked down and saw two gleaming, intelligent eyes staring back at you from the shadows. It was a small, scruffy mouse, its whiskers twitching, its nose twitching. It was utterly unafraid, almost curious. You held your breath, expecting the stepmother to notice, to shriek, to demand the pest be exterminated. But she was absorbed in chastising one of her daughters for a misplaced ribbon. The mouse, emboldened, scampered out, sniffed at the fallen spoon, and then looked directly at you. It was a fleeting moment, a silent connection, but in your world of isolation, it felt profound. A tiny wild creature, showing no fear, a stark contrast to your own constant terror. The common trope of animals as allies to the downtrodden in folklore can be interpreted as a psychological coping mechanism, projecting companionship and aid onto the natural world when human support is absent. It was a small, almost imperceptible detail, but it lodged itself in your mind. You made a habit of leaving small crumbs of bread, a stray kernel of grain, by the hearth for your tiny, unexpected friend. The mouse, initially cautious, grew bolder, eventually coming to expect your offerings. It became a quiet ritual, a shared secret, a small act of rebellion against the constant hunger that permeated your existence. It was a tiny flicker of warmth in the cold, desolate landscape of your life. You sometimes whispered to it, sharing your silent hopes and fears, knowing it couldn't understand, but finding solace in the act of unburdening your soul. One bitterly cold evening, as you were meticulously darning a hole in your stepsister's silk stocking, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a chill through the already frigid kitchen. You shivered, pulling your threadbare shawl tighter around your shoulders. Your stepsisters, huddled by the roaring fire in the main parlour, shrieked in exaggerated discomfort. Your stepmother merely sneered. Work faster, Cinderella. The fire is for those who earn their warmth. You looked at the glowing embers in the hearth, a tiny defiant spark flickering within you. The injustice of it, the sheer, callous disregard for your suffering, ignited a simmering resentment. You were not just a servant. You were a human being, capable of dreams, capable of warmth, capable of more than this endless, degrading servitude. This silent anger, this slow burning defiance, was a dangerous emotion, but also a powerful one. It was the first faint stirrings of a desire for something more, something different, something beyond the confines of these cinders. As the days blurred into weeks, your resolve hardened. You would not simply endure, you would survive, and you would find a way out. The thought of escape, once a distant, impossible fantasy, began to take a more concrete shape. You didn't know how or when, but you knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within your very soul, that you would not remain Cinderella forever. The darkness that surrounded you could not extinguish the tiny, persistent ember of hope that glowed fiercely within your heart. You would find your own path, away from the cinders, away from the cruelty, and into a life of your own choosing. The idea of freedom, though distant, felt almost tangible, a whispered promise carried on the smoky air of the hearth. The monotonous cycle of chores and subtle cruelty continued, a grinding rhythm that threatened to extinguish any remaining spark within you. Yet, the small acts of defiance, the hidden crumbs for the mouse, the whispered dreams by the dying embers nourished a fragile hope. You lived for those fleeting moments of quiet solitude, when the house finally succumbed to sleep, and you could almost feel the presence of your long-lost parents, a comforting warmth in the chilling darkness of your existence. One particularly drab afternoon, as you were mending a torn velvet slipper belonging to your elder stepsister, a commotion erupted from the parlour. Shrill squeals of delight mingled with your stepmother's unusually agitated commands. You instinctively braced yourself, expecting another torrent of abuse directed your way, but the sound suggested something entirely different. Curiosity, a rare indulgence, pricked at you, peeking cautiously through the half-open parlour door. Your eyes widened at the sight that unfolded. Your stepmother held a large, ornate scroll, its edges gilded, its parchment thick and creamy. Her face, usually a mask of sharp disdain, was flushed with an almost giddy excitement. Your stepsisters, usually languid and sullen, were practically bouncing with anticipation. A royal ball, your stepmother shrieked, her voice a jarring mix of triumph and avarice. An invitation from the palace itself for all the eligible maidens in the kingdom. She unfurled the scroll, revealing elegant script and a regal seal, the words Grand Ball, Prince Charming, and eligible maidens swam before your eyes, blurring into a dizzying picture of a world utterly removed from your sooty existence. During periods of rigid social hierarchy, invitations to royal events were not mere social calls. They were carefully orchestrated displays of power and prestige, often serving as opportunities for the elite to solidify alliances or for eligible bachelorettes to make advantageous marriages. Such an invitation would indeed cause a significant stir in any household. Your stepsisters immediately dissolved into a cacophony of excited chatter, each vying to outdo the other with exclamations of what they would wear, who they would dance with, and how they would surely capture the prince's attention. "I shall wear my blue silk." "Mother," cried Drusilla, the older, more boisterous sister. "No." "My rose satin," snapped Anastasia, the younger, preening one, your stepmother, basking in their manufactured excitement, began to issue orders for new gowns, for jewels, for the finest silks and velvets the local merchants could provide. You retreated to the kitchen, the reality of your situation pressing down on you with suffocating weight. A royal ball. The thought was absurd, a cruel joke. You, Cinderella, perpetually covered in ash and dressed in rags, could no more attend a royal ball than the mouse who shared your crumbs. Yet a tiny rebellious flicker ignited within your heart, a yearning, a desperate irrational longing for just one night of escape, of beauty, of being seen as something more than just a servant. The days leading up to the ball became a frantic blur of activity, all of it centered around the preparations of your stepfamily. The house, usually silent save for your endless chores, was now a whirlwind of tailors, seamstresses, jewellers, and hairdressers. Bolts of expensive fabric lay draped over chairs, the air thick with the scent of silk and perfume. Your stepsisters spent hours agonizing over hemlines, bickering over ribbons, and preening before polished mirrors, their vanity reaching grotesque new heights. You were, of course, at the centre of it all, yet utterly excluded. You ran errands, fetching pins, boiling water for hair rinses, polishing endless pairs of shoes. You stitched delicate lace onto their gowns, your fingers aching, while they complained about the fit, about a wrinkle here, a loose thread there. You watched them, the envy a bitter taste on your tongue, but beneath it, a strange fascination. This was a world you had only dreamed of, a world of elegance and refinement, albeit marred by their inherent vulgarity. One afternoon, while your stepsisters were engaged in a particularly ferocious argument over which one would wear the only pearl necklace, your stepmother turned to you, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Cinderella," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You must be eager to attend the ball, yes." Your heart leaped. For a fleeting, foolish moment, you dared to hope. Had she had a change of heart, a sudden pang of conscience? "Oh, if only." "Stepmother," you began, trying to keep your voice even. "But I have no gown, no proper shoes." She cut you off with a harsh, barking laugh. Your stepsisters joined in, their cackles echoing through the parlour. "You, at the royal ball," your stepmother sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Don't be ridiculous. You are fit only for the cinders. Besides," she continued, surveying your patched garments, "even if you had a gown, the prince would simply laugh you out of the ballroom." The word struck you like a physical blow, sharper and more painful than any slap. They extinguished the fragile flicker of hope, leaving behind only the familiar ache of humiliation. You retreated to the kitchen, tears blurring your vision as you resumed your endless scrubbing of pots. The injustice of it, the sheer, deliberate cruelty of dangling a dream before you only to snatch it away, felt unbearable. As the day of the ball drew nearer, the tension in the house escalated. Your stepmother was a whirlwind of frantic energy, driving everyone to ensure her daughters were presented perfectly. You worked tirelessly, fueled by a mixture of resentment and a strange, almost morbid curiosity. You watched as the last touches were applied, the intricate hairstyles, towering with pins and ribbons, the shimmering gowns, rustling with silk and taffeta, the sparkling jewels that caught the candlelight. Your stepsisters, despite their inherent unpleasantness, did look transformed, almost regal, in their finery. On the evening of the ball, the air buzzed with an almost palpable excitement. The carriage, an old, dilapidated affair, hired from the village, arrived, its wheels creaking loudly. Your stepsisters, after a final flurry of preening and bickering, descended the stairs, their faces alight with anticipation. Your stepmother, draped in her finest velvet, gave you one last unscornful look. "You will stay here, Cinderella," she commanded, her voice cold and devoid of any warmth. "Ensure the fire is kept, and the house is in order, and do not dream of leaving this kitchen." With a swish of her voluminous skirts, she swept out the door, followed by her giggling daughters. The carriage creaked away, its sound slowly fading into the distance. Silence descended upon the house, a vast oppressive silence that felt heavier than usual. You stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of their hurried departure scattered pins, a discarded piece of ribbon, the faint scent of their expensive perfumes. The fire in the hearth crackled merrily. Oblivious to your despair, you looked at your own reflection in the grimy window pane, a smudged face, tear-streaked eyes, a figure draped in rags. The contrast to the dazzling images you had just witnessed was unbearable. A sob escaped your lips, raw and guttural, unlike any sound you usually allowed yourself to make. You sank to the floor, leaning against the cold stone hearth, and buried your face in your ash-stained hands. The injustice, the loneliness, the sheer, crushing weight of your servitude overwhelmed you. This was your life. Endless toil, endless cruelty, endless yearning for a dream that would never materialize. You were trapped, irrevocably. As your tears flowed freely, hot and bitter, a tiny rustle came from the corner of the hearth. The scruffy little mouse, your silent confidant, peered out, its small nose twitching. It looked at you, its beady eyes remarkably intelligent, almost empathetic. Then, from the shadows, other small creatures began to emerge. More mice, a few plump field mice, and even a couple of sparrows, who perched tentatively on the windowsill. They seemed drawn to your grief, silent witnesses to your despair. You hardly noticed them at first, lost in your own sorrow, but then a flicker of movement caught your eye. A field mouse, bolder than the rest, approached you, sniffing gently at your trembling hand. It was a tiny, insignificant gesture, but in that moment of utter desolation, it felt like a lifeline. It reminded you that you were not entirely alone, that even in this house of cruelty, a small corner of empathy existed. You sat there for a long time, the little creatures watching you with an almost uncanny stillness. The fire in the hearth slowly died down, leaving behind only glowing embers. The house was utterly silent, save for your sniffles and the tiny rustlings of your animal companions. The dream of the ball, once so vivid, faded into a dull ache, replaced by the grim reality of your circumstances. You were Cinderella, and you would remain Cinderella, destined for a life of cinders and servitude. The idea of magic, of a fairy godmother, of a miraculous escape, felt utterly childish, a foolish fantasy in a world so relentlessly, brutally real. The evolution of the fairy godmother character in folklore is complex. Early versions of the Cinderella tale often featured the spirit of the deceased mother or nature spirits providing aid, a more primal and less overtly magical intervention, suggesting a deep connection to ancestral or natural forces rather than pure supernatural benevolence. You had no such benevolent spirit. You only had yourself, your quiet defiance, and the enduring pain of your plight. The stillness of the house after your step-family's departure felt vast and heavy, a silence broken only by your soft sniffles and the tiny rustlings of your animal companions. The raw ache of humiliation and sorrow consumed you, leaving you numb. You sat by the dying embers of the hearth, a forgotten figure in a house now empty of its cruel inhabitants, but brimming with the ghosts of your shattered dreams. As the night deepened, and the distant sounds of the ball faint and mocking, faded into the wind. Something shifted. The small, scruffy mouse, your silent confidant, scampered closer, its tiny whiskers twitching. It looked at you with an unnerving intelligence, its beady eyes reflecting the last embers of the fire. Then, from the shadows, other creatures emerged: a plump field mouse, its fur soft and grey, several sparrows, their tiny claws scratching gently on the windowsill, even a lizard, its scales shimmering faintly in the dim light, crawled out from beneath a loose flagstone. They gathered around you, a silent, watchful audience, their presence a strange comfort in your utter desolation. You watched them, your tears slowly drying on your cheeks. They seemed to radiate a gentle, unspoken empathy. The mouse, bolder now, nudged your outstretched hand with its nose. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, they began to move, not randomly, but with a quiet, purposeful energy. The sparrows fluttered down, pecking at loose threads on the discarded ball gown remnants your stepsisters had left behind. The mice, with surprising strength, began to drag tiny scraps of fabric towards you. You watched, mesmerized, as they began to gather materials: a discarded ribbon, a forgotten piece of lace, a silk flower that had fallen from a hair adornment. They brought them to your lap, pushing them gently with their tiny noses and beaks. It was a strange, silent offering, a collective gesture of comfort that transcended the boundaries of species. The trope of animals assisting a benevolent human character is a recurring motif in folklore, often symbolizing a deep connection to nature or representing unseen forces of good rewarding kindness, a common belief in many animistic traditions. This wasn't just cute, it was a profound, almost mystical moment in your isolated existence. You finally understood. They were trying to help you. They were offering what little they had, their tiny contributions to a desperate, impossible dream, a spark, tiny at first, then growing into a flickering flame, ignited within you. It was a foolish, irrational hope, but in the face of such overwhelming despair, even the smallest glimmer was a lifeline. You picked up a piece of discarded blue silk, its texture surprisingly soft against your calloused fingers. Could it be? Could you really? With a renewed purpose, you began to work. Your fingers, usually clumsy with exhaustion, now moved with a surprising dexterity, guided by an almost frantic energy. The animals assisted, bringing you more scraps, holding threads taut, even trying to retrieve needles that had fallen to the floor. It was a bizarre, silent symphony of collaboration. You took the scraps of silk, the bits of lace, the stray ribbons, and began to stitch. Not a grand gown, not one of the elaborate creations your stepsisters would wear, but something simple, something born of necessity and desperate hope. You worked through the night, fueled by a strange combination of adrenaline and a burgeoning belief in the impossible. The moon, a thin sliver outside the window, slowly traversed the sky. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon, you held it up, a dress. It was crude, patched together from mismatched scraps, and far from the elegant gowns you had seen. The silk was wrinkled, the lace unevenly stitched, but it was a dress. Your dress, made by your own hands, with the silent help of your unlikely companions. You even fashioned a crude pair of slippers from an old, worn piece of velvet. Not elegant, but practical. You slipped it on. It was ill-fitting in places, but it was clean, and it wasn't rags. You looked at your reflection in the polished surface of a kettle, a ghost of a smile touching your lips. It was a testament to defiance, a quiet act of rebellion. You looked at the little animals gathered around you, their eyes bright with an almost human satisfaction. You even managed a small chuckle, a sound so unfamiliar it startled you. But then, As the first rays of sun peeked over the horizon, casting the kitchen in a pale grey light, you heard it, the distant creak of wheels, the familiar rattle of the hired carriage. They were coming home. Panic seized you. The dream, the fleeting moment of hope, shattered. You couldn't be seen like this. They would laugh. They would mock. They would punish you for this audacious act of rebellion. Quickly, you whispered to the animals, your voice urgent. Hide. The little creatures scattered, disappearing into the shadows. You frantically tried to pull off the dress, to hide it, to return to your usual rags, but your fingers fumbled, clumsy with terror. The key turned in the lock. The door burst open, and there they were, your stepmother and stepsisters, their faces etched with disappointment and fury. The ball had not gone as planned. The prince, apparently, had paid them little mind. Their evening had been a disaster. Their anger, thwarted at the ball, was now ready to be unleashed upon you. Your stepmother's eyes, sharp and predatory, immediately fell upon you, still struggling with the dress, the velvet slippers peeking out from beneath your hem. Her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice a piercing, venomous sound. "You dare to dream of finery, you worthless cinder girl!" Before you could react, your stepsisters lunged at you. Their faces contorted with jealous rage, they tore at the makeshift gown, ripping the fragile stitches, pulling at the mismatched fabrics. The silk ripped, the lace shredded, the velvet slippers were flung across the room. They pulled at your hair, twisted your arm, their laughter cruel and mocking as the dress was reduced to worthless scraps once more. You crumpled to the floor, sobbing. The pain of their physical assault, nothing compared to the agony of your shattered hope. Historically, jealousy and rivalries within households, particularly among female family members competing for limited resources or social standing, could lead to severe emotional and physical abuse. Making this scene grimly realistic for the period, the humiliation was complete. You were once again in rags, surrounded by the remnants of your foolish dream. The house was filled with their triumphant cackles, and your stepmother's chilling pronouncements, "You will never leave these cinders. Cinderella, never." But then, just as despair threatened to consume you entirely, something happened. A soft warm glow erupted from the corner of the kitchen, near the dying embers of the hearth. It wasn't the fire itself, but something else, something impossibly bright and ethereal. The oppressive weight in the room seemed to lift, replaced by a gentle and soothing warmth. You looked up, your tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief. Standing there, bathed in an otherworldly light, was an old woman. She wasn't grand or imposing, but rather small and unassuming, dressed in a simple shimmering cloak that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. Her face was kind, her eyes radiating a profound compassion, a wisdom that seemed to stretch back through the ages. She held a slender, elegant wand in her hand, tipped with a tiny, delicate star that pulsed with soft light. Your stepmother and stepsisters, suddenly silent, stared at her, their faces contorted in a mixture of fear and awe. They tried to shriek, to curse, but no sound escaped their lips. They seemed frozen in place, utterly mesmerized, utterly powerless. "Poor child," the old woman said, her voice soft as a whisper, yet it filled the room, resonating directly in your heart. "You weep for a dream that is within your grasp. Do not despair." You stared at her, speechless, a fairy godmother. It felt like a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and grief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The concept of a benevolent supernatural patron, often an older woman, appearing to aid the virtuous and downtrodden, is a cornerstone of many folk tales across cultures, serving as a symbol of divine intervention or the triumph of good over evil. This figure was a direct manifestation of collective human hope against impossible odds. Who are you?" You finally managed to whisper, your voice trembling. She smiled. A gentle, knowing smile. "I am your fairy godmother, dear child, and I have come to help you achieve your heart's desire." Her gaze swept over the ruined dress, the scattered scraps of fabric. "A royal ball, you say, and you wish to attend?" You nodded frantically, tears streaming down your face again, but these were tears of desperate hope. "Then a royal ball you shall have," she declared, her voice imbued with a quiet power. "But first, we need a carriage, a grand one." She pointed her wand towards a large, plump pumpkin sitting on the counter, destined for tomorrow's stew. With a graceful flick of her wrist, a shower of golden sparks erupted from the wand. The pumpkin began to shimmer, to grow, its rough skin smoothing and hardening, transforming before your very eyes into a magnificent, gilded carriage, its wheels gleaming, its interior plush and inviting. Your jaw dropped. This was real. This was magic. True, undeniable magic. Your step-family, still frozen in place, stared with wide, horrified eyes, unable to comprehend the spectacle unfolding before them. Next, she turned her attention to the scruffy mice who had gathered. "And horses," she announced. Another flick of her wand. The mice, caught in a swirling vortex of golden light, began to grow, their tiny bodies stretching, their fur transforming into sleek, shimmering coats of white. Their whiskers became elegant bridles, their tails magnificent plumes. In a blink, they were 4 majestic white horses, pawing impatiently at the stone floor. Your eyes darted from the horses to the sparrows. "Footmen," she declared, and with another shower of sparks, the birds transformed into 2 immaculately dressed footmen, their tiny features still discernible, but now impossibly human. They stood ramrod straight, holding open the carriage door with an air of professional dignity. Finally, she turned back to you, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Now, for you, my dear." She surveyed your tattered rags, the ash smudged on your face, a gown worthy of a princess. With a majestic sweep of her wand, a cascade of golden light enveloped you. The rough, patched rags vanished, replaced by a gown of shimmering, ethereal fabric, the colour of moonlight on water. It flowed around you like a cloud, adorned with delicate silver embroidery that sparkled with countless tiny jewels. Your hair, once lank and ash-dusted, was swept up into an elegant coiffure, adorned with a delicate tiara that seemed woven from starlight. And on your feet, impossibly, were shoes, not the rough velvet ones you had made, but a pair of slippers made entirely of what appeared to be pure, shimmering glass. They caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows, impossibly delicate, impossibly beautiful. You looked down at yourself, then at your reflection in the polished silver of a teapot. You were transformed, utterly, miraculously transformed. You looked nothing like the Cinderella who slept by the cinders. You were radiant, elegant, beautiful. It was a metamorphosis so complete, so breathtaking, that it defied all logic. "But my dear," your fairy godmother said, her voice growing serious, "remember this, all magic has its limits. At the stroke of midnight, the spell will break, the carriage will become a pumpkin, the horses mice, the footmen sparrows, and your gown will revert to its original state. You must be home before the last chime dies." You nodded, speechless, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the transformation, the impossible gift she had bestowed upon you. You understood the warning, the inherent impermanence of this borrowed grandeur. This was a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of glory. "Now go, child," she urged, her kind eyes twinkling. "Go to the ball, and let the prince see the true beauty within you." You stepped out of the kitchen, your glass slippers making no sound on the stone floor. The footman bowed low, holding open the carriage door. You looked back at your stepmother and stepsisters, still frozen, their faces pale with shock and envy. A triumphant, almost mischievous glint entered your eyes. You stepped into the magnificent carriage, the plush velvet cushioning your seat. The door closed with a soft click. The carriage began to move, its gilded wheels rolling silently over the cobblestones. You peered out the window, watching the familiar, dreary house recede into the distance, its windows dark and uninviting. You were leaving it behind, if only for a few hours. The air felt fresh, exhilarating, filled with the promise of an unimaginable night. This was not a dream. This was real. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, you were truly, undeniably free. The ball awaited. The magnificent carriage glided through the moonlit streets, a shimmering beacon of impossible magic. You pressed your face to the glass, watching the familiar, dreary village houses disappear behind you, replaced by grander estates, their windows glowing with soft lamplight. The air, crisp and cool, carried the faint, exhilarating strains of music, drawing you closer to the heart of the kingdom. Your glass slippers, impossibly delicate, seemed to hum with the magic that coursed through them, a silent promise of the wonders awaiting you. The journey was a blur of heightened senses. The scent of blossoming night-blooming jasmine, carried on the breeze, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the horse's breath. The rhythm of the carriage wheels was a soft, hypnotic hum, a stark contrast to the creaking, dilapidated cart that usually ferried your stepfamily. You were acutely aware of the plush velvet beneath you, the cool glass of the window against your cheek, the shimmering fabric of your gown rustling with every breath. This was luxury, true luxury, a world away from the rough straw and coarse rags that had been your constant companions. As the carriage approached the palace gates, a tremor of apprehension shot through you. What if you were discovered? What if your true identity, the cinder girl from the hearth, was somehow revealed? Your heart hammered against your ribs like a trapped bird. But then, you remembered the fairy godmother's words, "Let the prince see the true beauty within you," and the magic. It felt so real, so potent. You took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the warmth of the spell to calm your racing pulse. The palace gates, towering structures of wrought iron adorned with gleaming brass, swung open silently as your carriage approached. Guards, clad in polished armour, stood at attention, their faces unreadable. You glimpsed the sprawling palace grounds, meticulously manicured gardens, and ornate fountains sparkling in the moonlight. This was a place of immense wealth and power, a world so far removed from your humble origins that it felt like stepping into a dream. The carriage rolled smoothly up the long, winding drive, finally drawing to a halt before the grand entrance of the palace. Liveried footmen, real ones this time, stood ready to open the carriage door. You took a moment, gathering your composure, before stepping out. The cool polished marble beneath your glass slippers felt impossibly smooth, a sensation that sent a shiver of delight through you. You ascended the grand staircase, its steps wide and shallow, designed for leisurely ascent. The air inside the palace was thick with the scent of beeswax, expensive perfumes and exotic flowers, murmuring voices, soft laughter, and the distant strains of a string orchestra filled the vast hall. You could hear the rustle of silk gowns, the clink of jewels, the light tap of dancing shoes on the polished floor. It was a symphony of opulence, a world you had only dared to imagine. You paused at the entrance to the ballroom, the sheer scale of the gathering taking your breath away. Hundreds of people, dressed in the finest silks, velvets, and brocades, moved gracefully across the floor, illuminated by countless flickering candles and enormous chandeliers. The room was a kaleidoscope of colour and movement, a living tapestry of the kingdom's elite. You felt a brief pang of intimidation, your heart fluttering with a mixture of awe and lingering anxiety. Grand royal balls in European history were not merely social events, but crucial political and social arenas where status was asserted, alliances formed, and marriages arranged. making the entry of an unknown, dazzling figure a truly disruptive event. This wasn't just a dance, it was a societal performance. Then, you saw them, your stepmother and stepsisters. They were near the refreshment table, their faces flushed with mild irritation, clearly still annoyed by the prince's apparent lack of interest. They looked utterly unremarkable amidst the splendour, their gowns, which had seemed so magnificent back home, now appearing somewhat garish and ill-fitting in this grand setting. You felt a wave of quiet satisfaction, a small, triumphant flicker in your heart. They would never suspect, they would never know. You walked into the ballroom, your glass slippers making no sound, gliding almost effortlessly across the polished floor. Heads began to turn. A ripple of whispers spread through the room, a collective murmur of curiosity and admiration. People paused their conversations, their dancing faltered. All eyes were on you. You could feel their gaze, a potent mixture of wonder and intrigue, and for the first time in your life, you felt truly seen, truly admired, not for what you could do, but for who you appeared to be. You held your head high, your movements graceful, a natural elegance blossoming within you, an elegance you hadn't known you possessed. You carried yourself with an air of quiet confidence, a serene mystery that captivated all who beheld you. You didn't seek attention, but it found you nonetheless. The sheer incongruity of your simple ethereal gown amidst the more elaborate finery of the other guests made you stand out. Not just as beautiful, but as utterly unique. Then, you saw him, the prince. He was standing near the centre of the ballroom, surrounded by a small throng of courtiers, but his gaze was fixed solely on you. He was tall, with a kind face and eyes that held a genuine warmth. He watched you with an expression of profound wonder, his usual royal composure seemingly forgotten. He began to walk towards you, parting the crowd like water. The murmuring intensified, hushed whispers of, "Who is she?" following his path. Your heart began to pound again. But this time, it was not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating mix of excitement and disbelief. This was it, the moment you had dreamed of, the impossible dream come to life. He stopped before you, bowing deeply. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gentle, surprisingly unaffected by his royal status. "May I have this dance, fair maiden?" You curtsied, a perfect, graceful movement, and placed your hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring, as he led you onto the dance floor. The orchestra, as if on cue, began a new waltz, its melody sweeping and romantic. You moved together, effortlessly, as if you had danced together 1,000 times. He was a skilled dancer, leading with a gentle confidence, and you followed, your glass slippers seeming to float above the ground. You felt weightless, ethereal, utterly absorbed in the moment. You danced for what felt like an eternity, losing yourself in the rhythm of the music and the warmth of his presence. He spoke to you, asking your name, your origins, but you simply smiled, offering evasive answers, maintaining the veil of mystery. "I am but a visitor," you murmured, "a traveller who stumbled upon this enchanting night." He seemed enchanted by your reticence, by the riddle that you presented. He tried to guess your name, offering fanciful suggestions, but you simply shook your head, a playful smile on your lips. Your stepmother and stepsisters, observing from afar, were beside themselves with fury and frustration. They couldn't believe their eyes. This unknown, stunning maiden had captured the prince's undivided attention, completely overshadowing their own efforts. They whispered furiously to each other, their faces contorted with venomous envy, trying to discern your identity, unaware of the ashes that still clung to your true self. The intense competition for advantageous marriages within aristocratic circles often led to bitter rivalries and public displays of social manoeuvring. making the step-family's reaction highly plausible for the period. The prince never left your side. He brought you refreshments, spoke to you with genuine interest, and danced with you again and again, ignoring all other hopeful maidens. His attention was unwavering, his gaze filled with a warmth that you had never experienced. You found yourself drawn to him, to his kindness, his genuine curiosity, his obvious admiration. It was a connection that transcended the magic, a recognition of something deeper than just a shimmering gown. As the night progressed, the magic of the ball began to take on a surreal quality. The chandeliers seemed to sparkle brighter, the music to swell with more passion, the air to hum with an indescribable joy. You found yourself truly happy, a feeling so foreign, so utterly unexpected, that it brought a quiet ache to your chest. You had never known such pure, unadulterated delight. But then, the palace clock began its slow, deliberate chimes. 1, 2, 3. Each bell stroke vibrated through the air, a chilling reminder of your limited time. Your heart leapt into your throat. Midnight, the spell, the inevitable return to reality. You looked at the prince, his face still alight with joy, oblivious to the impending doom. You wanted to stay, to prolong this magical night, to never return to the cold, hard truth of your life. But the fairy godmother's warning echoed in your mind, clear and absolute. You had to go. As the 9th chime resonated through the ballroom, you gently pulled your hand from the prince's. He looked at you, puzzled. "My lady, what is it?" "I must go," you whispered, your voice urgent, barely audible above the music. "I must leave now." He tried to stop you. "But why? Where are you going? I haven't even learned your name." He reached for your hand, a look of genuine distress on his face, but you couldn't explain. The 10th chime reverberated, louder now, more insistent. The magic, you could feel it, was already beginning to hum with instability. The shimmering fabric of your gown seemed to ripple, the delicate jewels on your tiara to dim. With a desperate cry of farewell, you turned and fled. You raced across the ballroom floor, your glass slippers a blur, your gown flowing behind you like a cloud. The prince called after you, his voice filled with urgency, but you didn't look back. You couldn't. You ran down the grand staircase, the marble steps impossibly slick beneath your flying feet. The chimes echoed in your ears, each one a hammer blow driving you forward. The 11th chime rang out, a powerful resonant sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. You could feel the magic weakening, the ethereal glow around you beginning to flicker. You burst out of the palace doors, gasping for breath, the cool night air a shock against your flushed skin. The magnificent carriage stood waiting, its horses pawing impatiently, the footman holding the door open. You leapt inside, stumbling slightly in your haste. "Drive," you shrieked, your voice raw with panic. Faster. The carriage lurched forward, its gilded wheels spinning. You peered out the window, watching the palace lights recede rapidly behind you. The 12th chime began to toll, a slow, deliberate, ominous sound. 1, 2, 3. The magic was unraveling, rapidly, violently. You felt a terrifying sensation, as if your very molecules were shifting, changing. The soft velvet seat beneath you seemed to harden, grow rough. The elegant horses, glimpsed through the window, seemed to shrink, their forms becoming indistinct. 4, 5, 6. The carriage began to shudder, to shrink. The shimmering fabric of your gown rippled, felt coarser, thinner. The jewels on your tiara popped and winked out, replaced by nothing. 7, 8, 9. The transformation was almost complete. The scent of pumpkin filled the air, mingling with the faint musk of mice. The sound of the carriage wheels changed, becoming a familiar, rickety squeak. 10, 11, 12. The final chime, a resounding, irreversible clang, echoed through the night, and then, suddenly, It was over. You were no longer in a gilded carriage. You were sitting on a cold, muddy road. Surrounded by darkness, the magnificent carriage was gone, replaced by a large common pumpkin. Its stems snapped, its side bruised. The majestic horses were gone, replaced by 4 scruffy field mice, scampering into the undergrowth. The footmen were gone, replaced by 2 bewildered sparrows, fluttering away into the trees. And your gown, you looked down at yourself. The shimmering fabric, the delicate embroidery, the elegant tiara, all gone. You were once again in your rough, patched rags, covered in dirt and dust from the fall. Your hair, once elegantly coiffed, now hung lank and dishevelled around your face. The magic was completely, utterly gone, except for one thing. You looked down at your feet, and there they were, gleaming faintly in the faint moonlight, impossibly delicate, impossibly beautiful, the glass slippers. They were still on your feet, unharmed, untransformed, the fairy godmother's most precious gift, a singular remnant of the night's enchantment. The detail of the glass slipper's unique material is a point of contention among folklorists. Some argue it was originally vair, squirrel fur, a common luxury material, mistranslated to veriglass, while others contend glass was intentional to highlight its fragility and unique magic, making it a powerful symbolic object that defies transformation, regardless of its origin. Its survival of the magic's end was crucial. You stared at them, a mixture of awe and disbelief washing over you. They were real. The ball had been real. The prince, his kindness, his admiration, that had been real too. It wasn't just a dream. You had truly been a princess, if only for a few glorious hours. But now, you were back to reality, on a dark muddy road, far from the palace, wearing rags and carrying the impossible burden of those shimmering glass slippers. The cold reality of your situation pressed in. The magic was gone, and your stepmother and stepsisters would soon be home. You had to get back, to resume your charade, to hide the last tangible proof of your impossible night. The clock had struck midnight, and the true challenge, the aftermath of magic, was just beginning. The cold, muddy road was a harsh reminder of your fleeting enchantment. The magnificent carriage was now a bruised pumpkin, the majestic horses scampering mice, and your shimmering gown, once the envy of a ballroom, was nothing more than your familiar, tattered rags. Only the glass slippers remained, gleaming impossibly on your feet, a fragile, shimmering testament to the magic you had just experienced. They were beautiful, but also a dangerous liability. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through your exhaustion. Your stepmother and stepsisters would be home soon. Their disappointment from the ball likely turned into bitter fury. You had to get back, to resume your endless chores, to bury this impossible secret before dawn broke. With trembling fingers, you quickly slipped off the glass slippers, wrapping them carefully in a piece of discarded linen you found on the road. They felt strangely heavy in your hands, a treasure that carried immense risk. You stuffed them deep into the meagre pockets of your tattered apron, hoping their delicate form would survive the journey. You ran, not with the graceful ease of a princess, but with the frantic desperation of a servant fearing punishment. Your bare feet slapped against the cold, damp earth, pebbles and thorns biting into your soles. The thought of your stepmother's wrath, the inevitable beatings, spurred you on. You didn't dare look back at the palace, a shimmering dream now fading into the distance. All that mattered was reaching the miserable cottage before they did. You stumbled through the familiar, unlit paths, your vision blurred by exhaustion and the remnants of tears. The forest, which had seemed so benign under the fairy godmother's spell, now loomed menacingly, its shadows deepening, its silence thick with unseen threats. You thought of wolves, of highwaymen, of the dark things that lurked in the night. The glamour of the ball, the warmth of the prince's hand, felt like a distant, impossible dream, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of your world. You reached the cottage just as the first faint hint of grey touched the eastern sky. The hired carriage was already creaking up the lane, its silhouette growing larger with every passing second. You fumbled with the latch on the kitchen door, your fingers stiff with cold, and slipped inside just as the carriage pulled to a halt outside. You frantically kicked off your shoes, pulled out the glass slippers, and scrambled to hide them beneath your straw pallet, burying them deep within the scratchy fibres. Then, with a practiced speed born of desperate necessity, you resumed your usual position by the hearth, stoking the dying embers, feigning sleep. The door burst open. Your stepmother and stepsisters stormed in, their faces contorted with fury. "That wretched girl!" your stepmother shrieked, kicking at your pallet. The ball was a disaster. The prince ignored us all for some unknown hussy. You feigned a groggy awakening, rubbing your eyes. "Oh, stepmother, have you returned so soon?" you murmured, trying to sound genuinely surprised. They hardly noticed you. Too consumed by their own rage, they recounted their humiliating evening, complaining bitterly about the mysterious maiden who had captivated the prince's attention. You listened, pretending to sympathize, a secret smile playing on your lips. They would never know it was you. You, Cinderella, the Cinder Girl, had danced with the prince, and they, for all their finery, had been invisible. This small, silent triumph was a warm ember in the cold ash of your life. The days that followed were a grueling test of your endurance. Your stepmother and stepsisters, fueled by their thwarted ambitions, were even more cruel and demanding than before. They railed against the unknown hussy, vowing revenge, completely unaware that the object of their ire was living under their very roof. You worked tirelessly, driven by the secret knowledge of your magical night, and the constant fear of discovery. You perfected your innocent facade, keeping your eyes downcast, your voice soft, never betraying the fierce, defiant spirit that now burned within you. The glass slippers remained hidden, your most treasured and dangerous secret. You would occasionally, in the dead of night, pull them out from beneath your pallet, allowing their shimmering beauty to fill your eyes. They were a tangible link to the magic, a promise that a world beyond your servitude truly existed. You would run your fingers over their impossibly smooth surface, marvelling at their delicate strength, their otherworldly gleam. The material of the glass slipper is a subject of academic debate among folklorists and historians. While the popular understanding is glass, some argue it might have been a mistranslation of ver, a type of squirrel fur, prized for its softness and warmth in medieval Europe, a luxury material that would also signify wealth and rarity. The idea of wearing fur slippers to a ball, though less romantic, would be historically more practical than glass. However, in your lived experience, they were undeniably glass, shimmering with inexplicable magic. One morning, a week after the ball, a tremendous commotion erupted in the village. Trumpets blared, drums pounded, and a royal herald, dressed in the prince's livery, rode through the streets, accompanied by several guards. He bore a royal proclamation, and his voice, amplified by the trumpets, echoed through the quiet lanes. Hear ye, he boomed, unfurling a scroll. By decree of his royal highness, Prince Charming, the prince seeks the maiden who wore this slipper. He held aloft a single, delicate glass slipper, shimmering with an ethereal glow, catching the sunlight in 1,000 tiny facets. It was your slipper, the one you had lost in your desperate flight. Your heart leapt into your throat, a mixture of exhilaration and terror. They were searching for you. The prince had not forgotten, but what would happen if they found you? You were a Cinder Girl, not a princess. How could you explain the magic, the transformation? The consequences of discovery could be dire. Your stepmother, who had rushed out with her daughters at the sound of the commotion, let out a shriek of disbelief. The slipper! That's the one, oh, my daughters. This is our chance. She immediately began to primp and preen her daughters, ordering them to ready themselves, her face alight with avarice and ambition. The royal herald announced that every eligible maiden in the kingdom must try on the slipper. The prince, he declared, would marry only the woman whose foot perfectly fit the delicate glass slipper. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy of hope and desperation throughout the kingdom. Every household with unmarried daughters began a frantic preparation, polishing, preening, and dreaming of a royal match. Your stepsisters were beside themselves with excitement. They spent hours trying to make their feet smaller, binding them tightly with strips of cloth, soaking them in hot water, even trying to force them into ill-fitting shoes. They pinched, squeezed, and complained, their vanity reaching new heights of absurdity. You watched them, a silent observer, as they contorted their feet, their faces red with effort, their determination to secure a royal match overriding any sense of comfort or dignity. The practice of foot binding, though most famously associated with historical China, has parallels in European fashion where tight lacing or restrictive footwear was used to achieve a desired aesthetic, often at the cost of physical comfort or health. The idea of forcing a foot into a shoe, even painfully, for social gain, speaks to the extreme pressures on women for advantageous marriages. This wasn't just comical, it was a grim reflection of societal expectations. The days leading up to the prince's arrival at your village were a whirlwind of activity for you. You were tasked with polishing your stepsisters' regular shoes, preparing their elaborate meals to nourish their delicate constitutions, and generally ensuring their comfort as they prepared for their great trial. You saw the glass slipper every time the herald came to the village to make his announcement, shimmering in his gloved hand, a constant, beautiful torment. You also noticed a strange detail during these preparations. Your stepsisters, in their desperate attempts to shrink their feet, began to develop painful calluses and blisters. The smell of their medicated salves, mixed with the perfumed foot baths, was nauseating. One evening, you overheard your stepmother instructing them on how to hide the swelling with extra layers of silk stockings, and even how to contort their toes to fit into smaller shoes, hinting at drastic, painful measures if necessary. The lengths they were willing to go to for power and status were truly disturbing. The royal entourage arrived in your village with much fanfare. Trumpets blared, and the prince's gilded carriage, the very one that had been a pumpkin just a week ago, rolled through the main street. Drawing gasps of awe from the villagers, the herald announced that the prince would personally oversee the try-on, moving from house to house. Your stepmother was a flurry of nervous excitement. She had prepared a lavish spread of refreshments, hoping to impress the prince and his retinue. She ordered you to be invisible, to remain in the kitchen, out of sight. You would only embarrass us, she hissed, her eyes blazing. You retreated to your usual corner by the hearth, watching through a crack in the parlour door. The prince entered, looking every bit as charming and kind as you remembered. He looked tired. However, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that suggested a long, fruitless search. Your heart ached for him, knowing he was searching for you, yet unable to reveal yourself. One by one, the maidens of the village entered, some eager, some shy, all hopeful. They sat on a velvet cushion before the prince, while a royal footman carefully presented the glass slipper. Each tried, and each failed. Some groaned with effort, others merely sighed in resignation. The slipper remained stubbornly resistant, its delicate form refusing to yield to any foot. Finally, it was your stepsister's turn. Drusilla, the elder, went first. Her foot was plump and broad, clearly too large for the delicate slipper. She squeezed, she pushed, she grunted with effort, her face turning crimson. The footman tried to help, but the slipper wouldn't budge. "It's too tight," she wailed, tears of frustration springing to her eyes. "Perhaps if I'd just cut off a bit of my heel," she muttered, looking desperately at her mother, who was already contemplating the idea with a grim determination. This gruesome detail of self-mutilation to fit the slipper is a direct reference to some of the darker, more violent versions of the Cinderella tale, particularly those by the brothers Grimm, highlighting the extreme measures taken for social advancement. This wasn't just a fairy tale flourish, it was a stark portrayal of desperate ambition. Your stepmother, shockingly, considered it for a fleeting moment. Her eyes narrowed in a cold calculation, but then the herald, overhearing, cleared his throat sternly. "No, madame. The prince seeks a natural fit, no alterations." Next was Anastasia. Her foot was slightly smaller than her sister's, but still far too wide for the impossibly narrow slipper. She shoved and strained, her face contorting in a grotesque grimace. She even tried to force her toes back, her face going pale with pain. "Perhaps my toes are just a bit long," she whimpered, looking to her mother for approval for a similar gruesome solution. The prince, observing their desperate, almost violent attempts, looked increasingly disheartened. His initial hope seemed to be fading, replaced by a quiet resignation. He sighed, rubbing his temples, clearly weary of the charade. Your stepmother, seeing his growing disinterest, began to make excuses. "Your Highness, perhaps the slipper has shrunk, or perhaps my daughters are simply too robust for such a delicate trifle." She shot a venomous glance at the slipper, as if it were to blame. As the last hopeful maiden failed, a pall of disappointment settled over the parlour. The prince looked around, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests, then lingering, almost accidentally, on the half-open kitchen door. He caught a glimpse of your form, half hidden in the shadows, your ragged clothes a stark contrast to the finery of the room. "Are there no other maidens in this household?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Your stepmother stiffened. "No. Your Highness only Cinderella, my kitchen scullery maid. She is quite unsuitable." She waved a dismissive hand, trying to redirect his attention. "You wouldn't want to bother with her. Your Highness, she is quite clumsy." But the prince's gaze remained fixed on you. His eyes, though weary, held a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even a vague sense of familiarity. He had seen you dance, after all, bathed in magic. But it was you he had connected with, not merely the gown. "I insist," he said, his voice gaining a touch of royal authority. "Every maiden." The proclamation was clear. Your stepmother flushed, but dared not argue with royalty. With a harsh whisper, she ordered you to come forward. Your heart hammered. This was it, the moment of truth. You straightened your shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen, into the full light of the parlour, and into the discerning gaze of the prince. You stepped into the parlour, your rags a stark contrast to the shimmering silks and velvets of your stepsisters. The prince's gaze, however, was fixed on you, a strange flicker of recognition in his tired eyes. Your stepmother, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury, gestured impatiently for you to sit. You sank onto the small velvet cushion, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The royal footman, holding the shimmering glass slipper with utmost care, knelt before you. The slipper, impossibly delicate, seemed to glow in his gloved hand. You looked at it, then at your own bare foot, calloused and grimy from years of hard labour. The contrast was absurd, almost laughable, yet a profound sense of destiny settled upon you. This was it, the moment of truth. Your stepsisters, unable to contain their spite, began to snicker. "Look at her," Drusilla whispered loudly. "Her feet are like lumps of clay." Anastasia giggled. adding, "It would shatter on her." Your stepmother merely sneered, confident that this public humiliation would finally extinguish any lingering spark of hope within you. The public shaming of the poor or those of lower status was a common social tactic in hierarchical societies, designed to maintain order and reinforce class distinctions. The step-family's behaviour, while cruel, was a reflection of accepted social norms of the time. But the prince, his eyes fixed on you, silenced them with a single, sharp glance. "Silence," he commanded, his voice firm. He watched intently as the footman carefully presented the slipper. You took a deep breath, trying to calm your trembling hands. You extended your foot, and the footman, with a practiced gentleness, began to ease the glass slipper under your foot. It slid on, effortlessly, as if it were moulded precisely for your foot. There was no struggle, no pushing, no squeezing. It was a perfect, undeniable fit. The glass seemed to shimmer, embracing your foot with a soft, ethereal glow. A gasp rippled through the room. Your stepmother's face went white, then mottled with a terrifying crimson. Your stepsisters stared, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with disbelief and horror. The prince, however, rose slowly, his face alight with dawning wonder. He knelt before you, his eyes fixed on your foot. Then slowly, he looked up, meeting your gaze. "You," he whispered, a profound realization dawning in his eyes. It was you. You simply nodded, unable to speak, tears welling up in your eyes, tears of relief, of triumph, of a lifetime of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. The truth was out. The Cinder Girl was the princess, your stepmother, recovering from her initial shock, let out a piercing shriek of fury. "Impossible. She's a trickster. A common scullery maid. She cannot be the one. Your Highness." She lunged forward, trying to pull the slipper from your foot, her face contorted with grotesque rage. But the prince quickly stood, stepping between you and her. His hand rested firmly, protectively, on your shoulder. "Enough," he commanded, his voice ringing with royal authority. "The slipper does not lie. She is the one." Just then, as if summoned by the prince's declaration, a soft, warm glow filled the parlour. Standing in the doorway, bathed in a gentle, shimmering light, was your fairy godmother. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with profound satisfaction. Her simple, shimmering cloak seemed to ripple, radiating an aura of undeniable magic. The sudden reappearance of the fairy godmother at the crucial moment of recognition is a common narrative device in many versions of Cinderella, symbolizing divine or benevolent intervention to ensure justice and the triumph of virtue. This was not just serendipity, it was destiny asserting itself. Your stepmother and stepsisters let out strangled cries of terror. They had been momentarily stunned by your transformation at the ball. But now, seeing the source of the magic, the true power behind your miraculous appearance, they were overcome with primal fear. They cowered, unable to move, their faces pale with abject dread. "Indeed," the fairy godmother said, her voice soft but resonating with power. "The slipper, like the heart, reveals the truth. This child, Cinderella, possesses a spirit more beautiful than any gown, a grace more enduring than any magic." She looked directly at your stepmother, her eyes holding a stern, unspoken judgment. "And now, her true worth shall be recognized." With a gentle wave of her wand, a cascade of golden light enveloped you. The rags that had been your prison vanished, replaced once more by the magnificent, shimmering gown of moonlight and silver, the delicate tiara, and the ethereal beauty that had captivated the prince. Your hair, once dishevelled, now fell in elegant waves around your shoulders. You were no longer the Cinder Girl. You were the radiant maiden from the ball, transformed completely, Undeniably, the villagers who had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion, gasped in collective awe. Whispers erupted, a mixture of wonder and disbelief. They had seen the two Cinderella girls, the downtrodden servant. But now they saw a princess, a figure of impossible beauty and grace. The prince, his face alight with wonder and adoration. "Reach for your hand, my lady," he said. His voice thick with emotion. "I have searched the kingdom for you." He brought your hand to his lips, a gesture of profound respect and affection. Your stepmother and stepsisters, witnessing this ultimate triumph, finally broke free from their frozen state. They shrieked, not just in anger, but in utter despair. They had lost everything. Their ambition had been thwarted, their cruelty exposed, and their own grotesque attempts to force the slipper had been futile. Drusilla, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, tried to tear at her own hair. Anastasia dissolved into hysterical sobs. Their downfall was complete, witnessed by all. The fairy godmother, her work done, gave you one last, knowing smile with another silent wave of her wand. A subtle transformation occurred, not for you, but for your step-family. No grand, visible magic, but a more insidious, perhaps poetic, form of justice. Your stepmother's sharp features seemed to subtly exaggerate, her mouth turning down into a perpetual sneer, her eyes narrowing into a permanently discontented gaze. Your stepsisters' faces, already contorted by malice, seemed to subtly twist further, their beauty, such as it was, fading, replaced by a lingering sourness that reflected their inner ugliness. It was a transformation of spirit made manifest, a subtle yet permanent reflection of their true natures. In some darker versions of the Cinderella tale, particularly those by the brothers Grimm, the stepsisters are subjected to gruesome punishments or symbolic transformations that reflect their inner wickedness, often losing their sight or being permanently disfigured as divine retribution, while not as overtly brutal. This subtle distortion serves a similar symbolic purpose. "Farewell, dear child," the fairy godmother whispered, her voice barely audible, "meant only for you. May your happiness be as boundless as your heart is kind." With a final gentle shimmer, she vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of starlight and hope. The prince, oblivious to this final subtle act of magic, looked at you, his eyes filled with genuine affection. "Come, my love," he said, gently leading you towards the door. "Let us go to the palace." You walked out of the house, your glass slippers clicking softly on the cobblestones, no longer unheard, but celebrated. The villagers cheered, their faces alight with joy and wonder. The prince's royal carriage, now gleaming majestically in the full light of day, waited for you. You stepped inside, your hand in the prince's, your heart soaring as the carriage pulled away. You looked back at the small, humble cottage, now a distant memory, its windows still dark, its shadows clinging. Your stepmother and stepsisters stood at the doorway, their figures small and pathetic, their faces twisted with envy and despair. Their world, once so dominant, had crumbled. Your world, once so bleak, had just begun. The journey to the palace was a dream, a continuous celebration. The streets were lined with cheering crowds, strewing flowers in your path. You sat beside the prince, his hand holding yours, a silent promise of companionship and protection. You felt a sense of peace settle over you, a profound relief that the ordeal was truly over. You arrived at the palace to even grander fanfare. The courtiers, who had gossiped and speculated the night before, now bowed low, their faces filled with deference. You were no longer an unknown mystery. You were the beloved maiden, the one chosen by the prince, the one who had triumphed against all odds. The ensuing days were a whirlwind of activity. You were introduced to the king and queen, who, though initially surprised by your humble origins, were quickly charmed by your quiet grace and genuine kindness. They saw the happiness in their son's eyes, and that was enough. You were given new clothes, beautiful gowns woven from the finest silks and adorned with delicate jewels. You learned the intricate etiquette of court life, the formal dances, the subtle politics. It was a steep learning curve, but you approached it with a quiet determination, absorbing every lesson, every nuance. Hansel was not part of your current narrative. He was safe, still living his childhood with Martha at the inn, oblivious to the grand transformation that had taken place. You knew you would send for him, once you were truly settled, once you could ensure his safety and comfort without drawing suspicion. He was your brother, your first and most enduring bond, and you would never forget him. He was a piece of your real past, a connection to your true self, and you cherished the thought of reuniting with him in this new life. The omission of Hansel in the standard Cinderella narrative, despite a commonality of orphan siblings in other folk tales, highlights the singular focus on Cinderella's individual journey to escape servitude and achieve social elevation. Your personal responsibility for him, however, remained. You and the prince spent countless hours together, walking in the palace gardens, talking for hours in quiet corners of the library. You discovered that he was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in you. Not just your beauty or the magic that had brought you to him. You found yourself falling in love, a quiet, steady affection that grew with each passing day. He was your anchor, your protector, a beacon of hope in a world that had once been so dark. Yet, despite the luxury and the love, a part of you remained guarded. The memories of the cinders, the cruelty, the hunger, they lingered, subtle but persistent. You never spoke of them, not even to the prince. It was a secret world, a past you had lived through, but could never truly share. You knew that true power lay not just in a crown, but in the quiet strength forged in adversity, in the understanding of a life lived without privilege. You would rule with compassion, with an understanding of the common folk, because you had once been one of them. The wedding was a grand affair, celebrated with pomp and pageantry throughout the kingdom. You walked down the aisle, radiant in a gown of white satin, your hand in the prince's, your glass slippers shimmering with every step. You were a vision of beauty, a living fairy tale. The villagers, including Martha, were invited, and you caught her eye in the crowd, offering a warm, grateful smile. She beamed back, proud of the young girl she had taken in. As you exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish, a profound sense of peace settled over you. You were no longer lost, no longer alone. You were a princess, soon to be a queen, and you had found your place in the world. But the glass slipper, that symbol of magic and transformation, also served as a constant reminder of the fragile line between fate and choice, between enchantment and the harsh realities of life. It was a testament to impossible dreams, but also to the strength required to endure, to survive, and to ultimately triumph. The crown, surprisingly heavy and cool against your brow, felt both like a triumph and a constant reminder of the fragile balance you now maintained. You were a princess, soon to be queen, moving through a world of lavish silks and whispered protocols, a universe away from the rough straw and constant grime of your former life. Yet, the memory of the cinders, the bite of cold, and the gnawing hunger remained etched in your mind, a silent counterpoint to every luxurious meal, every warm gown. This lingering psychological impact of poverty and trauma, even after a change in circumstances, is a well-documented human experience, shaping perceptions and priorities long after the initial hardship has passed. Your new life was undeniably grand, but it was also profoundly informed by your past. Your marriage to the prince was a whirlwind of public appearances, ceremonial duties, and endless formal greetings, you learned quickly. Observing the subtle cues of court etiquette, mastering the art of polite conversation, and charming the wary nobility with your quiet grace, you never spoke of your past. Maintaining the carefully constructed narrative of a virtuous maiden from a modest, but respectable, background, whose parents had tragically succumbed to a distant illness. The glass slipper, the undeniable proof of your magical journey, served as the ultimate legitimizer, silencing any lingering doubts about your suitability. The prince, now your husband, was everything you had hoped for. He was kind, gentle, and genuinely devoted to you. He saw beyond the surface, recognizing the strength and compassion that had been forged in adversity. You spent hours together in the palace gardens, walking hand in hand, sharing quiet moments of intimacy that grounded you amidst the pomp and grandeur. He often spoke of your unique spirit, your serene demeanour, attributing it to a natural nobility. You smiled, allowing him his illusion, knowing the truth was far more complex and far less poetic. One afternoon, as you were overseeing the palace kitchens, a scent wafted from the ovens, the sweet, cloying aroma of gingerbread baking. A sudden wave of nausea washed over you, your stomach churning, your breath catching in your throat. The bustling kitchen, with its warmth and familiar sounds, instantly morphed into the terrifying, sickly sweet confines of the witch's house. You saw her grotesque smile, felt the searing heat of the oven, heard Hansel's desperate cries. You gripped the edge of a wooden table, your knuckles white, trying to steady yourself. A scullery maid, noticing your sudden pallor, rushed to your side. "Your Highness, are you unwell?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. You forced a smile, shaking your head. "No, just a touch of the vapours," you murmured, a common ailment among the ladies of the court, a convenient excuse. You quickly excused yourself, retreating to your private chambers, the phantom smell of gingerbread clinging to you like a shroud. You spent the rest of the day in quiet contemplation, the memory of the witch's oven, of your own terrifying ingenuity, a cold knot in your stomach, traumatic flashbacks, often triggered by sensory input like smells or sounds, are a classic symptom of post-traumatic stress, a condition that would have been unrecognized in historical context but undeniably experienced by survivors of extreme violence. This recurring sensory memory was a constant, unwelcome companion. The memory of Hansel, your beloved brother, was a much gentler, yet equally persistent presence. You had ensured his well-being from the moment you settled into the palace, a trusted royal messenger, disguised as a merchant, had been sent to the village with a generous sum of money for Martha, along with a quiet instruction to ensure Hansel received a good education and was cared for. You had not yet sent for him. Waiting for the perfect moment when your position was utterly secure, when you could introduce him without raising any questions about his background or yours, you imagined him, strong and healthy, perhaps learning to read and write, far from the shadows of hunger and abandonment. You also found yourself subtly influencing royal policy, driven by your own harsh experiences, when discussions arose about the kingdom's poor, about the orphans and the destitute. Your voice, though quiet, carried a new authority. You advocated for fairer taxes, for granaries to store food in the times of scarcity, for resources to be directed towards the most vulnerable. You spoke with an understanding that resonated beyond mere theoretical compassion, a lived empathy that surprised the other courtiers. Historical rulers, particularly queens, often exercised influence through subtle counsel and patronage, with their personal experiences, even if unstated, shaping their policy recommendations, especially concerning social welfare. You were not just a figurehead, you were a compassionate force for change. One day, While reviewing petitions from the common folk, you came across one from your former village, a plea for assistance after a particularly harsh winter had decimated their crops. You recognized the names, the familiar descriptions of the hardships you had once known, among the signatures. You saw Martha's name, clear and bold. Your heart ached with a familiar pang of gratitude and sorrow. You discreetly ensured that their petition was given priority, and a royal decree was issued providing relief, new seed, and tools for the struggling farmers. It was a silent act of repayment, a way to honour the kindness you had received. The question of your past, of your true origins, remained a dangerous, unspoken territory. You learned to deflect curious questions with charming smiles and vague answers, a master of gentle misdirection. The king and queen, for their part, were so delighted by their son's happiness that they seemed content to overlook the minor mystery of your background. They were, perhaps, too eager for a royal marriage, too caught up in the splendour of the moment, to dig too deeply. However, you still had to navigate the delicate balance of trust with the prince. While you loved him, and he adored you, a tiny guarded part of your soul remained private, a chamber where the raw truth of the witch, the gold, and the abandonment resided. You felt a twinge of guilt about this hidden part of yourself, but the fear of being seen as less than perfect, less than deserving of your newfound status, was too great. The enduring secrecy around past trauma, even in intimate relationships, is a common psychological defense mechanism, often driven by fear of judgment or re-traumatization. This internal conflict between truth and self-preservation is a powerful human struggle. It was a secret you guarded fiercely, even from the one you loved most. One evening, as you were preparing for a state dinner, you found yourself standing before a magnificent full-length mirror, something you had never possessed in your old life. You looked at your reflection, a young woman of elegance and poise, draped in shimmering silks, adorned with glittering jewels. Your eyes, once shadowed with exhaustion, now held a serene strength, a quiet wisdom. You barely recognized the Cinder Girl who had stared back from the grimy kettle, but then, as you reached up to adjust a pearl necklace, your fingers brushed against the small, almost imperceptible scar on your forearm, a faint line left by a thorn during one of your desperate foraging trips in the forest. Years ago, it was a tiny physical reminder, a quiet whisper of your past. It was a testament to the fact that while you had been transformed, physically and socially, the experiences that had shaped you were still a part of your very being. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between duties, you would slip away to the Royal Library. It was a vast room, filled with ancient tomes and rare manuscripts. You had never truly learned to read in your old life, only enough to decipher simple words. Now, you dedicated yourself to it, spending hours with a patient tutor, devouring books on history, governance, and even more surprisingly, natural sciences and herbalism. Your passion for plants, ignited by necessity in the forest, now blossomed in a scholarly pursuit. You saw patterns, connections, and deeper meanings in the world that others overlooked. The pursuit of knowledge, especially in areas of practical application like herbalism, was often a quiet but significant endeavour for women of varying social strata in historical periods, sometimes even leading to a respected, if unofficial, role in their communities. Your humble beginnings had given you a unique perspective, a grounding in the practical world that many born to privilege lacked. You discovered ancient texts describing the properties of rare minerals, and you immediately thought of the countless jewels you still possessed. You found treatises on trade routes and economies, and your mind, sharp and agile, began to formulate plans, strategies. The gold was no longer just a hidden treasure. It was a resource, a tool, a means to exert quiet influence, to build a legacy, to ensure your Hansel's future was even brighter than your own. You were not merely consuming knowledge, you were synthesizing it, adapting it, preparing for a future role far beyond that of a decorative princess. One morning, as you walked through the bustling palace market, overseeing the purchase of provisions, you caught sight of a familiar figure among the crowds. Your heart leapt into your throat. It was your stepmother. Her face was gaunt, her clothes threadbare, her once haughty expression replaced by a bitter, defeated slump. She looked nothing like the woman who had lorded over you. She was selling trinkets, her voice thin and reedy, trying to eke out a meagre living. Your stepsisters were nowhere to be seen, likely having abandoned her, as was often the fate of those who had fallen from grace. A wave of complex emotions washed over you, a pang of recognition, a flicker of the old fear, but overwhelmingly, a quiet sense of triumph. She didn't see you. Lost in her own misery, you were cloaked, surrounded by guards, utterly unrecognizable as the Cinderella she had tormented. You felt no malice, no desire for further revenge. Her current state was punishment enough. You simply continued on. A quiet, almost imperceptible nod to one of your guards, who discreetly dropped a few silver coins into her begging bowl as he passed. The concept of poetic justice, where the wicked receive a fitting, often ironic, punishment for their deeds, is a deeply ingrained theme in folklore, providing moral closure and reinforcing societal values without necessarily requiring direct vengeance. Her fate was her own. As time went on, and your position as the prince's beloved wife solidified, you knew the moment was approaching. The kingdom thrived under the prince's increasingly compassionate rule, a subtle shift in governance that many attributed to your quiet influence. You had brought light to a kingdom, and in doing so, you had found your own. One crisp autumn evening, as the moon hung full and bright in the night sky, you finally sent the summons. A trusted, discreet messenger, with a royal seal, rode to the distant village. He carried a letter, written in your own hand, its words simple and clear. To Martha, and to my brother. Hansel, the time has come. Come home. The word home felt profoundly different now. It was no longer the hovel of your torment. It was the palace, a place of safety, of love, of shared dreams. You stood by the large, ornate window of your chamber, looking out at the moonlit gardens, the soft glow of the palace illuminating the night. The glass slipper, polished and gleaming, sat on a velvet cushion on a nearby table, no longer hidden, but displayed with quiet pride. It was a testament to your journey, a symbol of your extraordinary path from cinders to crown. You had faced unimaginable darkness, had endured unspeakable cruelty, and had emerged not broken, but stronger, wiser, and ultimately free. The past would always be a part of you, but it no longer defined you. You were Cinderella, yes, but you were also a princess, a queen in the making, and a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience. The summons had been sent, a quiet ripple in the grand tapestry of your new royal life. You waited, a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation stirring within you, introducing Hansel. Your last tangible link to the painful past was a pivotal moment. You had meticulously crafted your new identity, carefully weaving a narrative that protected your secret. Now, you would bring a living piece of that secret into your perfectly constructed world. The days stretched, each one marked by your growing impatience. You found yourself pacing the palace gardens, staring out at the distant roads, imagining the small figure of your brother making his way towards you. You longed for his familiar presence, his uncomplicated affection, a bond that transcended titles and gowns. You were a princess, yes, but you were still Gretel, the protective older sister who had faced a monster to save her brother. Finally, a royal messenger arrived, dusty from his journey, bearing news. Hansel and Martha were at the palace gates, accompanied by a small, sturdy cart laden with what little belongings they possessed. Your heart leaped. You practically flew through the opulent corridors, your silks rustling, your steps light with an uncharacteristic urgency. You reached the grand entrance, where Hansel stood, small and somewhat overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the palace. He looked around, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and slight fear. Martha stood beside him, her face beaming with relief and pride. She wore her best, if still simple, dress, and her hands, accustomed to honest labour, clutched a small, worn bag. "Hansel," you cried, your voice thick with emotion, utterly forgetting your royal decorum. You rushed forward, sweeping him into a tight embrace. He clung to you, his small arms wrapped tightly around your waist, burying his face in your shimmering gown. The familiar sense of wood smoke and childhood memories instantly enveloped you. It was Hansel, whole and safe. You pulled back, holding him at arm's length, tears streaming down your face. He had grown taller, his face fuller, less gaunt. His eyes, though still holding a flicker of past shadows, were bright with childish wonder. "Gretel," he whispered, his voice muffled. You're a princess." His eyes darted to your crown, then back to your face, as if trying to reconcile the two images. You smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached your eyes. "And you, my dear brother, are home." You embraced Martha then, holding her close. "Thank you, Martha," you whispered, "for everything." She patted your back, her eyes twinkling. "You are truly blessed, child. And you, Hansel, you have a remarkable sister." She kept her voice low, a knowing look in her eyes, indicating she understood the quiet transformation that had taken place beyond mere social status. You introduced them to the prince, who had quietly joined you. He approached Hansel with a gentle smile. "So, this is the brave young man I've heard so much about," he said, his voice kind. He extended his hand, and Hansel, after a moment's hesitation, shook it firmly. The prince then turned to Martha, thanking her profusely for her care of Hansel. He was gracious, welcoming, and his immediate warmth put both Hansel and Martha at ease. Arrangements were made swiftly. Hansel was given his own comfortable chambers, a small suite suitable for a young prince's brother. He was assigned a tutor, a kind, scholarly man who would continue his education. He would also be given lessons in swordsmanship, in riding, and in courtly manners, preparing him for a life of privilege and responsibility. You made sure he had good clothes, warm meals, and the freedom to explore the palace grounds, far from the drudgery he had once known in historical royal courts. Younger siblings of royalty, or those favoured by the monarch, were often integrated into the palace household, provided with education and training suitable for their new, elevated status, reinforcing the family's position and extending influence. This was not merely charity, it was a pragmatic integration into the royal sphere. Martha, for her loyalty and kindness, was given a generous pension and a small, charming cottage near the palace gardens, where she could live comfortably for the rest of her days. She continued to visit Hansel regularly, a comforting presence, bridging the gap between his old life and his new. You ensured she lacked for nothing, a quiet act of gratitude that honoured your past. Hansel's adjustment was remarkably swift. He was a resilient child, and the comforts of the palace, the endless food, the warmth, the beautiful toys, quickly became his new normal. He adored the prince, seeing him as a kind, older brother figure, and revelled in the stories of knights and dragons his tutor read to him. He slowly began to forget the worst of the forest, the gnawing hunger, the terrifying sweetness of the witch's house. You watched him, a profound sense of peace settling over you. You had saved him, truly saved him, and given him a future he could never have dreamed of. For you, however, The process of truly reconciling your past with your present was more complex. The memories of the witch, though now distant, remained potent. You still occasionally smelled gingerbread and would subtly excuse yourself from the room. The sight of a large and roaring oven could still make you instinctively flinch. You never spoke of it, not even to Hansel. He was too young, too innocent to bear such a burden. You wanted his memories of that time to be of rescue, not of horror. One quiet afternoon, as you were sitting with the prince in the palace library, surrounded by ancient tomes, he found a book of local folklore. He began to read aloud, a charming tale of a young maiden who had escaped a cruel stepmother and found her true love. It was a version of your own story, sanitized, romanticized, stripped of its gruesome details. The glass slipper was emphasized, the magic presented as whimsical and benevolent. You listened, a faint smile playing on your lips, a private irony dancing in your eyes. He read about the pumpkin carriage, the mice transformed into horses, the footman. He read about the slipper and the prince's quest. But there was no mention of the witch, no hint of the oven, no whisper of the desperate, bloody ingenuity it took to survive. Fairy tales, as they are passed down and codified, often undergo a process of sanitization, removing gruesome or morally ambiguous elements to make them more palatable for wider audiences, particularly children. The omission of violence or self-mutilation is a common example of this historical evolution of folklore. The true story, the raw, brutal truth, remained your own. "It is a beautiful tale, my love," the prince mused, closing the book. Such a perfect ending, to think such evil could exist, only to be vanquished by pure magic and virtue. He looked at you, his eyes filled with adoration, seeing only the innocent, beautiful princess of the story. You simply nodded, leaning your head against his shoulder. "Indeed, my love, a beautiful tale." You chose your words carefully, allowing him his perception, protecting him from the harsh realities that had shaped your very being. The truth, in its rawest form, could be a burden. Sometimes a beautiful lie was kinder, safer. You continued to use your unique understanding of the common folk, forged in your difficult past, to subtly guide royal policy. You initiated programs for orphanages, ensuring that no child in the kingdom would suffer the abandonment you had. You established granaries for famine relief, remembering the gnawing hunger that had once been your constant companion. You even supported trade routes that brought affordable goods to the common markets. Understanding the struggle of daily life, your power was not overtly wielded, but gently, persistently applied, a compassionate force for good, born from the very suffering you had endured. The gold, your immense hidden fortune, remained a carefully guarded secret. You had wisely invested a portion of it, purchasing lands in distant provinces, securing profitable trade ventures through trusted, discreet merchants. This wealth gave you an unprecedented level of independence within the confines of the court. You could fund your own charitable endeavours, support your favoured causes, and maintain a quiet, powerful influence without having to rely solely on the royal coffers. It was a tangible form of security, a guarantee that you would never again be truly powerless. You visited Hansel frequently in his chambers, often finding him engrossed in his lessons or playing with the palace pets. He was happy, truly happy, and that was your greatest reward. One afternoon, he showed you a drawing he had made, a grand castle, with a small smiling boy and a beautiful princess standing hand in hand. The sun was shining brightly and tiny. Happy animals frolicked in the foreground. There were no dark forests, no menacing figures, no gingerbread houses. His memory had been mercifully reshaped, purged of its terror. You reached out, gently ruffling his hair. "It's beautiful, Hansel," you whispered, "absolutely beautiful." You knew that his peace, his innocence, was a fragile thing, and you would protect it fiercely, even if it meant carrying the burden of your shared past alone. Years passed. You became queen, ruling alongside your beloved prince. Your kingdom prospered, known for its compassion and justice. You were revered by your people, known for your wisdom and kindness, qualities they attributed to your unique, mysterious origins. You wore your crown with dignity, your glass slipper a treasured relic, displayed in a place of honour, a symbol of your remarkable journey. But sometimes, late at night, in the quiet solitude of your royal chambers, you would look at your reflection in the polished surface of your ornate dressing table. You would see the beautiful queen, adorned in silks and jewels, her face serene, her eyes wise, and beneath that polished surface, you would catch a glimpse of the Cinder Girl, the survivor, the girl who had stared into the face of evil and prevailed. The scars were there, subtle but real, etched into your soul, a permanent reminder of the disturbing truth behind the dazzling fairy tale. You had won. But victory, as you had learned, always came with its own price. The story had a happy ending, yes, but your story, the real one, was far more complex, far more profound. The crown, surprisingly heavy and cool against your brow, felt both like a triumph and a constant reminder of the fragile balance you now maintained. You were a princess, soon to be queen, moving through a world of lavish silks and whispered protocols, a universe away from the rough straw and constant grime of your former life. Yet, the memory of the cinders, the bite of cold, and the gnawing hunger remained etched in your mind, a silent counterpoint to every luxurious meal, every warm gown, this lingering psychological impact of poverty and trauma, even after a change in circumstances, is a well-documented human experience, shaping perceptions and priorities long after the initial hardship has passed. Your new life was undeniably grand, but it was also profoundly informed by your past. Your marriage to the prince was a whirlwind of public appearances, ceremonial duties, and endless formal greetings. You learned quickly, observing the subtle cues of court etiquette, mastering the art of polite conversation, and charming the wary nobility with your quiet grace. You never spoke of your past, maintaining the carefully constructed narrative of a virtuous maiden from a modest, but respectable, background, whose parents had tragically succumbed to a distant illness. The glass slipper, the undeniable proof of your magical journey, served as the ultimate legitimizer, silencing any lingering doubts about your suitability. The prince, now your husband, was everything you had hoped for. He was kind, gentle, and genuinely devoted to you. He saw beyond the surface, recognizing the strength and compassion that had been forged in adversity. You spent hours together in the palace gardens, walking hand in hand, sharing quiet moments of intimacy that grounded you amidst the pomp and grandeur. He often spoke of your unique spirit, your serene demeanour, attributing it to a natural nobility. You smiled, allowing him his illusion, knowing the truth was far more complex and far less poetic. One afternoon, as you were overseeing the palace kitchens, a scent wafted from the ovens, the sweet, cloying aroma of gingerbread baking. A sudden wave of nausea washed over you, your stomach churning, your breath catching in your throat. The bustling kitchen, with its warmth and familiar sounds, instantly morphed into the terrifying, sickly sweet confines of the witch's house. You saw her grotesque smile, felt the searing heat of the oven, heard Hansel's desperate cries. You gripped the edge of a wooden table, your knuckles white, trying to steady yourself. A scullery maid, noticing your sudden pallor, rushed to your side. "Your Highness, are you unwell?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. You forced a smile, shaking your head. "No, just a touch of the vapours," you murmured, a common ailment among the ladies of the court, A convenient excuse, you quickly excused yourself, retreating to your private chambers, the phantom smell of gingerbread clinging to you like a shroud. You spent the rest of the day in quiet contemplation, the memory of the witch's oven, of your own terrifying ingenuity. A cold knot in your stomach, traumatic flashbacks, often triggered by sensory input like smells or sounds, are a classic symptom of post-traumatic stress, a condition that would have been unrecognized in historical contexts but undeniably experienced by survivors of extreme violence. This recurring sensory memory was a constant, unwelcome companion. The memory of Hansel, your beloved brother, was a much gentler, yet equally persistent presence. You had ensured his well-being from the moment you settled into the palace, a trusted royal messenger, disguised as a merchant, had been sent to the village with a generous sum of money for Martha, along with quiet instructions to ensure Hansel received a good education and was cared for. You had not yet sent for him, waiting for the perfect moment when your position was utterly secure, when you could introduce him without raising any questions about his background or yours. You imagined him, strong and healthy, perhaps learning to read and write, far from the shadows of hunger and abandonment. You also found yourself subtly influencing royal policy, driven by your own harsh experiences, when discussions arose about the kingdom's poor, about the orphans and the destitute. Your voice, though quiet, carried a new authority. You advocated for fairer taxes, for granaries to store food in times of scarcity, for resources to be directed towards the most vulnerable. You spoke with an understanding that resonated beyond mere theoretical compassion, a lived empathy that surprised the other courtiers, historical rulers, particularly queens, often exercised influence through subtle counsel and patronage, with their personal experiences, even if unstated, shaping their policy recommendations, especially concerning social welfare. You were not just a figurehead, you were a compassionate force for change. One day, while reviewing petitions from the common folk, you came across one from your former village, a plea for assistance after a particularly harsh winter had decimated their crops. You recognized the names, the familiar descriptions of the hardships you had once known. Among the signatures, you saw Martha's name, clear and bold. Your heart ached with a familiar pang of gratitude and sorrow. You discreetly ensured that their petition was given priority, and a royal decree was issued providing relief, new seed, and tools for the struggling farmers. It was a silent act of repayment, a way to honour the kindness you had received. The question of your past, of your true origins, remained a dangerous unspoken territory. You learned to deflect curious questions with charming smiles and vague answers, a master of gentle misdirection. The king and queen, for their part, were so delighted by their son's happiness that they seemed content to overlook the minor mystery of your background. They were, perhaps, too eager for a royal marriage, too caught up in the splendour of the moment, to dig too deeply. However, you still had to navigate the delicate balance of trust with the prince while you loved him, and he adored you. A tiny guarded part of your soul remained private, a chamber where the raw truth of the witch, the gold, and the abandonment resided. You felt a twinge of guilt about this hidden part of yourself, but the fear of being seen as less than perfect, less than deserving of your newfound status, was too great. The enduring secrecy around past trauma, even in intimate relationships, is a common psychological defense mechanism, often driven by fear of judgment or re-traumatization. This internal conflict between truth and self-preservation is a powerful human struggle. It was a secret you guarded fiercely, even from the one you loved most. One evening, as you were preparing for a state dinner, you found yourself standing before a magnificent full-length mirror, something you had never possessed in your old life. You looked at your reflection, a young woman of elegance and poise, draped in shimmering silks, adorned with glittering jewels. Your eyes, once shadowed with exhaustion, now held a serene strength, a quiet wisdom. You barely recognized the cinder girl who had stared back from the grimy kettle. But then, as you reached up to adjust a pearl necklace, your fingers brushed against the small, almost imperceptible scar on your forearm, a faint line left by a thorn during one of your desperate foraging trips in the forest. Years ago, it was a tiny physical reminder, a quiet whisper of your past. It was a testament to the fact that while you had been transformed, physically and socially, the experiences that had shaped you were still a part of your very being. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between duties, you would slip away to the Royal Library. It was a vast room, filled with ancient tomes and rare manuscripts. You had never truly learned to read in your old life, only enough to decipher simple words. Now, you dedicated yourself to it, spending hours with a patient tutor, devouring books on history, governance, and even more surprisingly, natural sciences and herbalism, your passion for plants, ignited by necessity in the forest, now blossomed in a scholarly pursuit. You saw patterns, connections, and deeper meanings in the world that others overlooked. The pursuit of knowledge, especially in areas of practical application like herbalism, was often a quiet but significant endeavour for women of varying social strata in historical periods, sometimes even leading to a respected, if unofficial, role in their communities. Your humble beginnings had given you a unique perspective, a grounding in the practical world that many born to privilege lacked. You discovered ancient texts describing the properties of rare minerals, and you immediately thought of the countless jewels you still possessed. You found treatises on trade routes and economies, and your mind, sharp and agile, began to formulate plans, strategies. The gold was no longer just a hidden treasure. It was a resource, a tool, a means to exert quiet influence, to build a legacy, to ensure your Hansel's future was even brighter than your own. You were not merely consuming knowledge, you were synthesizing it, adapting it, preparing for a future role far beyond that of a decorative princess. One morning, as you walked through the bustling palace market, overseeing the purchase of provisions, you caught sight of a familiar figure among the crowds. Your heart leaped into your throat. It was your stepmother. Her face was gaunt, her clothes threadbare, her once haughty expression replaced by a bitter, defeated slump. She looked nothing like the woman who had lorded over you. She was selling trinkets, her voice thin and reedy, trying to eke out a meagre living. Your stepsisters were nowhere to be seen, likely having abandoned her, as was often the fate of those who had fallen from grace. A wave of complex emotions washed over you, a pang of recognition, a flicker of the old fear, but overwhelmingly, a quiet sense of triumph. She didn't see you. Lost in her own misery, you were cloaked, surrounded by guards, utterly unrecognizable as the Cinderella she had tormented. You felt no malice, no desire for further revenge. Her current state was punishment enough. You simply continued on, a quiet, almost imperceptible nod to one of your guards, who discreetly dropped a few silver coins into her begging bowl as he passed. The concept of poetic justice, where the wicked receive a fitting, often ironic, punishment for their deeds, is a deeply ingrained theme in folklore, providing moral closure and reinforcing societal values without necessarily requiring direct vengeance. Her fate was her own. As time went on, and your position as the prince's beloved wife solidified, you knew the moment was approaching. The kingdom thrived under the prince's increasingly compassionate rule, a subtle shift in governance that many attributed to your quiet influence. You had brought light to a kingdom, and in doing so, you had found your own. One crisp autumn evening, as the moon hung full and bright in the night sky, You finally sent the summons. A trusted, discreet messenger, with a royal seal, rode to the distant village. He carried a letter, written in your own hand, its words simple and clear, to Martha and to my brother. Hansel, the time has come. Come home. The word home felt profoundly different now. It was no longer the hovel of your torment. It was the palace, a place of safety, of love, of shared dreams. You stood by the large, ornate window of your chamber, looking out at the moonlit gardens, the soft glow of the palace illuminating the night. The glass slipper, polished and gleaming, sat on a velvet cushion on a nearby table, no longer hidden, but displayed with quiet pride. It was a testament to your journey, a symbol of your extraordinary path from cinders to crown. You had faced unimaginable darkness, had endured unspeakable cruelty, and had emerged not broken, but stronger, wiser, and ultimately free. The past would always be a part of you, but it no longer defined you. You were Cinderella. Yes, but you were also a princess, a queen in the making, and a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience. The transition from princess to queen was a slow, deliberate dance of tradition and expectation, each step guided by custom and the weight of your newfound responsibilities. The crown, now worn with an ease that belied its immense significance, felt less like a heavy burden and more like a natural extension of your will. You had mastered the intricate courtly dances, the subtle art of diplomacy, and the delicate balance of power. Your kingdom prospered under your gentle yet firm guidance, its people thriving, its reputation for compassion spreading far and wide. Hansel, now a strapping young man, flourished at your side. He was no longer the frightened, hollow-eyed boy of the forest, but a confident, well-educated noble. He had embraced his new life with gusto, excelling in his studies, honing his swordsmanship, and developing a keen interest in the kingdom's governance. He was your closest confidant, the only one who truly understood the depth of your journey, though he never spoke of the specifics. His memories of the witch and the gingerbread house had receded into a distant, almost dreamlike fog. Mercifully vague and stripped of their terror, you had ensured his innocence, preserving his childhood in a way yours could never be. He was a constant, joyous reminder of your victory over the darkness. Your stepmother, as you had seen, had faded into the background, a ghost of her former cruel self. She was spotted occasionally in the poorer quarters of the city, hawking meagre wares, her once sharp features permanently etched with the bitterness of her downfall. Your stepsisters, it was rumoured, had married poorly, their vanity and ambition leading them to alliances that quickly soured, leaving them in circumstances no better than the common folk. You felt no malice, only a quiet, resolute understanding of the universal truth that kindness, not cruelty, ultimately triumphs. The decline of the wicked step-family, often to a state of destitution or social disgrace, is a common motif in many folklore traditions, serving as a moral lesson and a form of narrative justice for their past transgressions. Their fates were their own undoing. The glass slipper, that shimmering testament to your impossible transformation, remained a central symbol of your reign. It was displayed in the grand hall of the palace, enclosed within a velvet-lined crystal case, catching the sunlight and refracting it into 1,000 dancing rainbows. Visitors from across the land would gaze upon it with awe, marvelling at its delicate beauty and the miraculous story it represented. To the world, it was the embodiment of a fairy tale, a symbol of hope and destiny. To you, it was a constant, shimmering reminder of the darkness from which you had emerged, and the cunning, resilience, and sheer force of will that had allowed you to seize your fate. You often held court, listening to the petitions of your people. You remembered the hunger, the cold, the fear, and your judgments were always tempered with compassion. your policies guided by an unwavering commitment to justice and welfare. You established royal orphanages, ensuring that no child would ever know the desolation of abandonment. You oversaw the creation of vast granaries, stockpiling food against future famines, a direct response to the gnawing hunger that had once consumed you. Your knowledge of herbalism, once a desperate survival skill, became a cornerstone of royal healthcare, with gardens cultivated in the palace grounds providing medicinal plants for the kingdom's healers. The benevolent rule of a monarch who understands the plight of the common people, often because of a humble or challenging past, is a recurrent ideal in historical narratives and political philosophy, symbolizing enlightened leadership. You were not just a queen by birth. You were a queen by experience, by empathy, and by earned wisdom. Despite the boundless love and unwavering devotion of your husband, the prince, a tiny private part of your soul remained untouched, a sanctuary where the raw memories of the witch and the forest resided. You still never spoke of it. Not to him, not to Hansel, not to anyone. It was your burden, your truth, a unique understanding of the world's shadowed corners that no one else could share. Sometimes, late at night, a faint, inexplicable chill would sweep through your royal chambers, and you would trace the tiny faded scar on your forearm, a silent testament to the thorns and the trials of your past. One day, while walking in the palace gardens, you came across a rose bush. Its blossoms are deep, velvety red, a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from it, a subtle sweetness, not cloying, not terrifying, but just enough to remind you, fleetingly, of gingerbread. You paused, a wave of familiar nausea threatening to overwhelm you. But this time, something was different. You closed your eyes, breathed deeply, and allowed the memory to wash over you. The terror was still there, a whisper of dread, but it was accompanied by something else, a fierce, defiant pride. You had survived, you had endured, you had conquered. You opened your eyes, the nausea receding, replaced by a quiet strength. The scent of the rose was just a scent now, not a portal to your past. You had finally begun to integrate the trauma, to acknowledge it without letting it define you. You had not forgotten, but you were no longer imprisoned by it. The process of trauma integration, where past traumatic experiences are acknowledged and processed without overwhelming the individual, is a key aspect of psychological healing, allowing survivors to move forward with their lives in a more holistic way. You were no longer just a survivor. You were a thriver. Your immense wealth, carefully managed and wisely invested, served as a quiet, formidable power behind your throne. You had established secret trade routes, bypassing corrupt officials, bringing essential goods directly to your people. You funded exploration, sending ships to distant lands, not for conquest, but for knowledge, for new resources, for connections with other cultures. You sponsored scholars, artists, and innovators, creating a flourishing era of enlightenment within your kingdom. The gold, once merely a means of survival, had become a tool for transformative change, a catalyst for progress. You were a queen who understood the true value of resources, not just for personal gain, but for the collective good. As the years matured, the prince became king, and you, his beloved queen, your reign was marked by peace and prosperity, a golden age whispered about in future generations. You and the king ruled with wisdom and compassion, your bond deep and unwavering. You had built a family, a legacy, and a kingdom founded on principles of justice and empathy, principles forged in the crucible of your own extraordinary life. You lived a long, fulfilling life, surrounded by love, respect, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you had made a difference. The story of Cinderella, the Cinder girl who became a queen, was passed down through generations, becoming a cherished legend. But the truly disturbing truth, The raw, brutal reality of fire and fear, of cunning and survival, remained your own, a silent testament to the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. You had transformed ashes into a crown, not just through magic, but through sheer, unyielding will. And so, the story of Cinderella draws to a close. It is not a sparkling fairy tale ending, filled with twinkling lights and chirping birds, but a quiet, sombre conclusion, steeped in the harsh realities of survival. Imagine yourself, after all that horror, standing on the threshold of a new life. The cicadas outside may have quieted, or perhaps you're simply too exhausted to hear them anymore. The image of the dark forest, the dazzling yet deadly gingerbread house, and the flickering fire from that terrifying oven all seem to fade into the night, becoming a part of the past, of memory, though never truly erased. You've come a long way, overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Now, let your mind drift, relax every muscle, every lingering thought. The tranquil night will embrace you, lulling you into a deep, peaceful sleep. Let these final images dissipate, like faint wisps of smoke in the calm air. You are safe now. Sleep calls, good night, and have sweet dreams.